The story begins long before American troops crossed the Atlantic, in a city thousands of miles from the front lines, Hollywood. In the late 1930s, Los Angeles glowed with searchlights and celebrity premieres, yet beneath the glamour, an unmistakable tension was building. Newspapers carried headlines of Hitler's rise and the tightening grip of fascism across Europe. Filmmakers, screenwriters, and studio executives, many of them immigrants who had fled authoritarian regimes, recognized the threat earlier than much of the general public. As Europe slid toward war, Hollywood faced a crossroads: remain a factory of escapist entertainment, or use its enormous cultural influence to warn, educate, and prepare a nation that was still deeply divided about joining another global conflict. In studio backlots, where cobblestone European streets and grand palaces were constructed overnight for musicals and romantic dramas, filmmakers began reshaping those sets to tell darker, more urgent stories. Films like Confessions of a Nazi Spy, 1939, hinted at espionage networks operating in the United States, alarming some audiences while angering isolationists in Congress. The debate over whether Hollywood was warmongering reached the Senate floor. Yet these early films played a crucial role. They pushed the conversation into American living rooms at a time when many preferred not to see the world changing. Hollywood had begun its subtle campaign, not with propaganda, but with information. When war finally erupted in Europe, Hollywood's mission transformed from warning to mobilizing. Even before Pearl Harbor, the studios were hosting secret meetings with Washington officials who understood the reach of Hollywood's storytelling machinery. No other American institution had the power to shape public opinion so quickly or so vividly. Films became tools to build awareness, depicting the stakes of global conflict, explaining the ideological threat of fascism, and fostering sympathy for nations already under siege. In an era without social media or 24-hour news cycles, Hollywood's influence as a mass communicator became an invaluable national asset. After Pearl Harbor, the partnership between Hollywood and Washington became formal and far-reaching. The Office of War Information, OWI, established guidelines for how films could support national goals, boosting morale, explaining sacrifice, clarifying the reasons for war, and reinforcing unity across racial, economic, and political divides. Studio executives received memos outlining themes the government wanted emphasized: the heroism of everyday soldiers, the importance of war bonds, the necessity of rationing, and the harsh realities of global fascism. Hollywood still retained creative freedom, but it now worked with the full understanding that its films were part of a national wartime strategy. Directors who once specialized in musicals and comedies found themselves documenting factories, shipyards, and training camps. Hollywood's greatest talents, Frank Capra, John Ford, William Wyler, put aside glamorous careers to serve in uniform with motion picture units. They embedded themselves with infantry divisions, bomber crews, and naval task forces, often filming under fire. Their wartime documentaries did more than inform the American public. They provided commanders with training material, recorded battle strategies, and offered a psychological window into the experiences of soldiers on distant fronts. Hollywood had become not just an entertainer, but a participant in war. Back home, Hollywood's infrastructure became a logistical asset. Studios converted sound stages into training classrooms for the military. Costume departments created uniforms for new recruits before official supplies arrived. Prop shops built mock tanks and aircraft for instructional films. Animation studios, Walt Disney most notably, produced technical manuals, aircraft identification guides, and training reels that simplified complex engineering or gunnery techniques through clear, visual storytelling. In a nation mobilizing faster than ever before, Hollywood provided speed, clarity, and communication that textbooks and lectures could not match. Theaters themselves became part of the war effort. Newsreels brought frontline footage to millions of Americans every week, often their only visual connection to the progress of the war. Before feature films, audiences watched updates about the Pacific, the Mediterranean, and the Eastern Front, sometimes just days after the events occurred. These newsreels shaped public understanding, boosted morale, and created emotional bonds between civilians and the troops abroad. To a nation asked to ration, conserve, and sacrifice, Hollywood's weekly reminders of why those sacrifices mattered became essential. By the end of America's first year in the war, Hollywood had transformed from a symbol of escapist fantasy into one of the most powerful communication engines supporting the Allied cause. It warned the nation before the conflict, mobilized morale once war began, trained soldiers through innovative visual education, and kept the public connected to the hardships and heroism of the front lines. In a global struggle defined not only by weapons and armies, but by beliefs, values, and the resilience of civilian societies, Hollywood had become an indispensable pillar of America's wartime strength. With America fully at war, Hollywood's output accelerated at a staggering pace. The studios produced films that were simultaneously entertaining and instructive, blending patriotism with technical accuracy. Movies such as 30 Seconds Over Tokyo and Mrs. Miniver dramatized the human cost of war while emphasizing resilience, courage, and duty. The emotional impact was profound. Americans who had never seen a bomber crew in action or a family enduring air raids could now empathize with distant struggles as if they were happening next door. Hollywood had become a conduit for understanding war not as abstract strategy, but as a deeply human endeavor, where bravery, sacrifice, and perseverance were measured in lives, tears, and moral resolve. The collaboration between Hollywood and the military went beyond mere storytelling. Technical advisors from the Army, Navy, and Army Air Forces worked on film sets to ensure accuracy in uniforms, tactics, and equipment. Combat sequences were choreographed with guidance from veterans and officers, creating realistic portrayals of battles that were at once gripping and instructive. Soldiers returning home often remarked on the familiarity of what they saw on screen, while civilians gained a visceral understanding of the complexity and danger facing American troops. This partnership elevated films from entertainment to immersive tools that educated, motivated, and inspired. Propaganda, though carefully nuanced, became an essential tool. Unlike the blunt messages delivered in overt government posters or leaflets, Hollywood embedded persuasive themes within compelling narratives. Stories highlighted the heroism of ordinary Americans, the destructive ideology of the Axis, and the moral imperative of unity. Films reinforced national cohesion, encouraging war bond purchases, rationing, and volunteerism. They humanized the enemy without diminishing the threat, painting a picture that combined fear, moral clarity, and hope. Audiences left theaters with more than amusement. They left with a sense of purpose and agency in the war effort. Hollywood's reach extended beyond narrative features into documentaries and short subjects, which were distributed widely to military installations and civilian audiences. Filmmakers captured frontline action in Europe, North Africa, and the Pacific, providing real-time glimpses of campaigns such as Guadalcanal and the North African landings. Motion picture units often risked enemy fire to capture footage that would train soldiers, inform planners, and galvanize the public. These films conveyed authenticity, a rawness that resonated more powerfully than newspapers or radio alone, bridging the psychological gap between home and battlefield. Animation also played a vital role. Walt Disney Studios and other animation houses produced instructional and morale-boosting content. Cartoons simplified technical processes, taught aircraft identification, or illustrated safety protocols in a way that was immediately understandable to recruits of varying literacy levels. Beyond technical instruction, animated shorts like Der Führer's Face used satire to ridicule the Axis powers, boosting morale and creating a shared sense of purpose. Humor, artistry, and visual clarity became weapons as potent as bullets, shaping public sentiment and reinforcing the war effort in subtle but enduring ways. Hollywood's influence extended to recruitment and military integration. Films highlighted the heroism and dignity of diverse units, encouraging enlistment across regions, ethnicities, and genders. Women were depicted as essential contributors to the war effort, both in factories and auxiliary military units, helping transform societal perceptions and expand the workforce. By portraying a unified, capable population, Hollywood helped sustain the manpower and morale needed to maintain a global military campaign. The power of narrative to shape public behavior was now being wielded on an unprecedented scale. Meanwhile, studio stars themselves became powerful emissaries. Figures like Jimmy Stewart, Clark Gable, and James Cagney enlisted or worked in film units, lending both credibility and visibility to the war effort. Celebrities traveled to military bases, participated in bond drives, and even reported from the front lines, becoming living embodiments of Hollywood's commitment. Their presence amplified the emotional resonance of films and newsreels, forging a connection between the glamour of Hollywood and the grim realities of global conflict. Civilians, inspired by these figures, felt both entertained and morally compelled to contribute. By the end of 1943, Hollywood's contribution was undeniable. It had become a multidimensional instrument of national power, informing, motivating, training, and sustaining the American public and military. The City of Dreams had transformed into a city of strategy, using imagination, storytelling, and technology to influence real-world outcomes. In theaters and barracks alike, audiences absorbed lessons in courage, sacrifice, and unity. Through the lens of cameras and the magic of film, Hollywood had become a battlefield in its own right, helping to win hearts and minds, and ultimately contributing to victory in a global war. By 1944, the war had reached a critical juncture, and Hollywood's influence expanded in both scope and sophistication. Films now served as bridges between the front lines and the home front, giving Americans insight into the challenges faced by soldiers overseas. Movies like The Battle of Russia and The Fighting Lady offered audiences not only thrilling drama, but factual accounts of campaigns, strategy, and the human endurance required to survive. These films blurred the line between education and entertainment, making civilians more informed participants in the war effort and fostering empathy for the soldiers risking their lives in distant lands. The military recognized the value of Hollywood's creative expertise in shaping perception and morale. Directors embedded with combat units documented campaigns in North Africa, the Pacific, and Europe, often filming under harrowing conditions. They captured bombers in formation, troops storming beaches, and ships navigating dangerous waters, transforming the camera into both a witness and a teacher. These films were studied by recruits and commanders alike, providing visual lessons in tactics, discipline, and operational coordination. Hollywood had become a force multiplier, extending its reach from the theater to the battlefield and directly enhancing the effectiveness of the military. Newsreels were an essential conduit for connecting Americans to the war. Before feature films, audiences saw moving images of troops in action, ships launching into the Atlantic, and bombers preparing for raids over Europe. These weekly installments delivered immediacy and impact, making civilians feel connected to events thousands of miles away. They reinforced a sense of participation and urgency, encouraging contributions to war bonds, rationing, and community efforts. The shared experience of viewing these images forged a collective consciousness, uniting a diverse population behind a singular national purpose. Hollywood's creativity extended to training and technical instruction. Animated films, models, and live-action demonstrations taught aircraft recognition, proper use of weaponry, and battlefield safety. Complex procedures were distilled into clear visual narratives that enhanced comprehension and retention. For soldiers, these tools were not just educational, they were life-saving. A pilot could recognize enemy planes before a dogfight. An infantryman could navigate the hazards of an unfamiliar environment with better understanding. The ingenuity of Hollywood's visual storytelling became a literal instrument of survival. The influence of Hollywood also reshaped public perception of sacrifice and duty. Films celebrated ordinary Americans, factory workers, nurses, codebreakers, and soldiers, transforming them into national heroes. Women and minorities, often overlooked in mainstream culture, were given prominent roles, demonstrating their essential contributions. These portrayals not only encouraged enlistment and workforce participation, but also began to challenge social norms, cultivating a sense of shared responsibility and national identity. In essence, Hollywood was creating a narrative of inclusion and purpose that strengthened both morale and manpower. Stars of the silver screen became symbols of unity and courage. Jimmy Stewart flew combat missions in Europe, contributing his experience to training films. Clark Gable documented aerial combat as a correspondent. Their involvement humanized the war effort and created a tangible link between celebrity and national service. Audiences, inspired by their actions, experienced a deepened sense of duty and pride. Hollywood had leveraged not only its storytelling power, but also the charisma and credibility of its stars to reinforce commitment, morale, and cultural cohesion during an unprecedented global crisis. The studios themselves were transformed into engines of wartime productivity. Sound stages became classrooms and production hubs for military instruction films. Costume and prop departments provided uniforms, weapons replicas, and technical mock-ups. Production schedules were accelerated, and creative teams worked tirelessly to meet the insatiable demand for both morale-boosting and instructional content. Hollywood's physical infrastructure became as vital to the war effort as any factory, demonstrating the city's unique ability to turn artistry into practical, tangible contributions to national security. By mid-1944, Hollywood's impact was evident across multiple fronts. Civilians were informed, motivated, and emotionally invested. Soldiers were trained, encouraged, and inspired. The city that had once been synonymous with escapism had become an indispensable part of the nation's war machine. Films, newsreels, and documentaries were no longer entertainment alone. They were instruments of strategy, education, and unity. Hollywood had proven that storytelling could shape reality, prepare a nation, and help win a global conflict, ensuring that when American troops faced the Axis abroad, they did so with the full support, understanding, and encouragement of those on the home front. As 1944 progressed, Hollywood's role evolved from awareness and instruction to a full-scale cultural campaign supporting the Allied war effort. Films increasingly emphasized the global stakes of the conflict, depicting not only the heroism of American troops, but also the suffering endured by civilians under Axis occupation. Productions such as The Story of G.I. Joe and A Walk in the Sun humanized soldiers' experiences, illustrating the physical exhaustion, moral dilemmas, and relentless danger faced on the front lines. By translating strategy and battlefield conditions into emotionally resonant narratives, Hollywood allowed American audiences to internalize the realities of war in ways that statistics or headlines could never achieve. Behind the cameras, directors, cinematographers, and writers often shared the same risks as soldiers. Combat units embedded with filmmakers learned to navigate gunfire, artillery barrages, and aerial assaults while capturing footage that would later train troops or educate the public. William Wyler's The Memphis Belle documented a bomber crew on its final mission over Germany, offering both thrilling cinematic spectacle and practical instruction on teamwork, aircraft operation, and the realities of aerial warfare. These films served dual purposes. They informed and they inspired, transforming the abstract notion of war into a tangible, human experience. Hollywood's newsreels reached millions of Americans each week, delivering an immediacy that radio and newspapers could not replicate. Audiences saw D-Day preparations, soldiers boarding transport ships, and troops landing under fire, all within days of the actual events. The visual power of moving images created emotional connections that reinforced civilian participation in the war effort, from purchasing bonds to volunteering in local defense initiatives. By bridging the gap between home and battlefield, Hollywood made the distant war visceral, urgent, and personal, ensuring that the sacrifices demanded of civilians were understood and embraced. Animation continued to serve a vital role, particularly in training and morale. Walt Disney Studios produced short films illustrating complex processes like bomb assembly, aircraft recognition, and navigation procedures, distilling technical material into memorable, easily absorbed lessons. Simultaneously, satirical shorts ridiculed enemy leaders and ideology, reinforcing unity and psychological resilience on the home front. Humor became a weapon, educating while entertaining, and reinforcing the collective purpose of American society during a period of intense stress and sacrifice. Stars and studio personnel contributed far beyond their artistic talents. Figures such as Clark Gable, Jimmy Stewart, and Tyrone Power served in combat units or film divisions, often risking life to document operations or produce instructional materials. Their involvement lent credibility to Hollywood's wartime narratives and strengthened the symbolic connection between national culture and military service. Civilians watching films featuring these stars felt a personal link to the war, translating admiration into engagement, enlistment, and support. Hollywood celebrities became living embodiments of service, bridging the gap between fame and national duty. Training films and instructional content were disseminated directly to soldiers, complementing classroom instruction and hands-on training. Live-action sequences, models, and animations conveyed procedures with precision, helping troops understand vehicle operation, weapon handling, and tactical movement. This visual pedagogy increased retention, enhanced battlefield preparedness, and reduced mistakes that could prove fatal. In effect, Hollywood transformed its mastery of narrative and spectacle into a practical tool that saved lives and improved operational effectiveness. On the home front, propaganda films subtly reinforced social cohesion, highlighting the contributions of women, African Americans, and other previously marginalized groups in the workforce and military auxiliaries. Hollywood's depictions cultivated a sense of shared responsibility, emphasizing that victory depended on the collective efforts of an entire nation, not just soldiers abroad. Civilians, inspired and educated, participated in rationing, war bond drives, and civil defense initiatives with greater enthusiasm and commitment, recognizing that their efforts were part of a larger, vital struggle. By the end of 1944, Hollywood's influence had become multidimensional, a source of morale, a tool for education, a medium for propaganda, and a bridge between soldiers and civilians. The city's studios, actors, and filmmakers had turned storytelling into a strategic weapon, amplifying America's capacity to endure, adapt, and triumph. The reach of Hollywood extended from the battlefields of Europe and the Pacific to classrooms, theaters, and homes across the nation, proving that culture, creativity, and narrative power could be as critical to victory as tanks, ships, and planes. As 1945 approached, the full weight of Hollywood's contribution to the war effort became undeniable. The city had transformed from a hub of escapist fantasy into a center of national mobilization, its films shaping perceptions, morale, and action across the United States. Productions documented frontline heroism, the horrors of occupation, and the sacrifices of civilians, making distant battles immediately relevant to American audiences. Through meticulous storytelling, filmmakers created empathy for soldiers, understanding for strategy, and an emotional investment in victory, demonstrating that culture and war were now inseparable in the American consciousness. Directors and cinematographers embedded in combat zones captured the intensity and chaos of modern warfare with unprecedented realism. John Huston filmed the North African campaign, braving artillery fire and desert heat to document soldiers in action, while William Wyler followed bomber crews over Europe, revealing the precision, bravery, and fear inherent in aerial combat. These films were both historical records and instructional tools, teaching soldiers how to function as teams, navigate danger, and survive under relentless pressure. Hollywood's presence on the front lines blurred the line between observer and participant, making the industry a direct contributor to military effectiveness. Newsreels continued to deliver raw, immediate accounts of battles and troop movements, creating a collective national consciousness centered on the war. Cinemas became spaces where civilians and soldiers alike could witness the bravery and suffering of those on the front lines. Scenes of the D-Day landings, the liberation of Paris, and the advance through the Ardennes were shown weeks or even days after they occurred, fostering both empathy and a sense of urgency. Through these images, Americans understood that the war was not an abstraction, but a series of human stories demanding national attention, sacrifice, and commitment. Training films remained a critical component of military preparation. Animated sequences, technical demonstrations, and dramatized scenarios provided clarity and memorability in teaching complex tasks. Recruits could learn aircraft recognition, gunnery techniques, and tactical maneuvers through engaging visual storytelling, drastically improving comprehension and readiness. These innovations demonstrated the unique capacity of Hollywood to translate narrative expertise into practical military instruction, saving lives by ensuring soldiers were prepared before facing enemy fire. Hollywood's narrative influence also shaped perceptions of the enemy. Axis leaders and soldiers were portrayed with a combination of accuracy and moral framing, illustrating the ideological stakes of the conflict. Films highlighted the cruelty and oppression imposed on occupied populations, framing the war as a moral imperative as well as a military struggle. Audiences absorbed these portrayals not as entertainment alone, but as crucial context for understanding the scale and urgency of the global conflict, deepening national resolve to support both soldiers abroad and industrial production at home. Stars of the silver screen became cultural and motivational ambassadors. Jimmy Stewart, Clark Gable, and others served in combat and film units, their actions bridging the divide between celebrity and civic duty. Their contributions amplified the emotional power of Hollywood's wartime output, connecting audiences to the conflict in personal and immediate ways. Civilians inspired by these figures purchased war bonds, participated in rationing, and joined volunteer efforts, while soldiers saw familiar faces reinforcing their commitment to survival and mission success. Hollywood's influence extended beyond screens. It shaped behavior, morale, and national unity. On the home front, Hollywood celebrated the contributions of women and minority workers, showing them in factories, laboratories, and auxiliary services. These portrayals fostered inclusion and underscored the collective effort required for victory. Civilians understood that every role, whether producing munitions, driving supply convoys, or supporting intelligence operations, was vital. Hollywood films helped cement the understanding that war was a total enterprise, reliant on cooperation and sacrifice across every layer of society. By early 1945, the cumulative impact of Hollywood was clear. It had educated, motivated, and inspired a nation while directly contributing to military effectiveness through training films and documentation. The collaboration between culture and combat had created a unique strategic advantage. American society was united, informed, and emotionally invested in the war's outcome. Hollywood had proven that storytelling, creativity, and visual communication were not mere entertainment. They were powerful instruments of national survival and victory, shaping both hearts and minds in the fight against fascism. By the spring of 1945, Hollywood had become an indispensable component of America's wartime strategy, its influence reaching every corner of society and the battlefield alike. Films produced during this period conveyed not only the heroism of soldiers, but also the resilience of civilians enduring the privations of war. Stories depicted families rationing food, workers laboring in factories, and communities uniting for the war effort, illustrating the interconnectedness of home and front. Through these narratives, audiences understood that victory required more than soldiers. It demanded the commitment, sacrifice, and ingenuity of an entire nation. Direct engagement with the military intensified Hollywood's impact. Directors and cinematographers embedded in campaigns across Europe and the Pacific captured both the chaos of battle and the discipline required to prevail. John Ford's iconic work at Omaha Beach and on Iwo Jima documented soldiers' courage and ingenuity under fire, providing invaluable visual records for training, strategic planning, and morale. These films offered civilians a direct, emotional connection to the war and gave troops a resource for learning from the actions of their peers. Hollywood had become a conduit of both knowledge and empathy, transforming perception into preparation. Newsreels, screened weekly in theaters nationwide, created a shared national experience of the war. Americans could witness the preparation and execution of critical operations, from the liberation of European towns to the advance across the Pacific Islands. The immediacy of these visuals bridged thousands of miles, allowing civilians to grasp the scope and stakes of military campaigns. Beyond informing the public, newsreels fostered a sense of responsibility and urgency, galvanizing engagement in bond drives, volunteer efforts, and rationing programs. Hollywood's reach was not limited to entertainment. It shaped awareness, behavior, and national cohesion. Animation and instructional films played a vital role in translating complex military procedures into clear, accessible lessons. Walt Disney Studios, Warner Brothers, and other animation houses created short features that explained aircraft identification, weapon maintenance, and combat strategies in visually compelling ways. By simplifying difficult concepts, These films improved comprehension and retention among recruits, directly impacting combat readiness and survivability. Hollywood had effectively turned its expertise in visual storytelling into a tactical asset, enhancing the capabilities of soldiers across multiple theaters of war. The portrayal of ordinary Americans as heroes resonated powerfully with both civilian and military audiences. Films highlighted factory workers, nurses, codebreakers, and other essential contributors, reinforcing the message that every role mattered. Women and minorities, previously underrepresented in mainstream culture, were shown performing critical tasks with skill and courage. These depictions inspired recruitment, sustained morale, and strengthened the social fabric necessary for total war. Hollywood helped redefine heroism, emphasizing collective effort as much as individual valor. Stars continued to serve as both role models and active participants. Jimmy Stewart flew combat missions while contributing to training films. Clark Gable documented aerial operations, and other actors engaged in war bond tours and morale-boosting activities. Their visibility reinforced the legitimacy and urgency of Hollywood's wartime message. Audiences, emotionally connected to these figures through their cinematic work, were inspired to contribute to the war effort, creating a powerful feedback loop between culture and national service. On the industrial front, Hollywood's infrastructure was repurposed to support the war effort. Sound stages became training classrooms. Prop and costume shops produced uniforms, weapons replicas, and instructional materials. Production teams worked tirelessly to meet the unprecedented demand for both morale-boosting entertainment and operational content. Hollywood's physical and creative resources were mobilized with a precision rivaling that of any factory, proving that culture could function as a strategic instrument in modern warfare. By mid-1945, the cumulative effect of Hollywood's efforts was unmistakable. American society was informed, motivated, and united, while soldiers were trained, inspired, and emotionally supported. Films, newsreels, and documentaries bridged the gap between home and battlefield, transforming civilians into active participants and soldiers into more effective fighters. Hollywood had become a weapon of national strategy, proving that narrative, imagery, and culture could influence outcomes on par with guns, tanks, and planes. In shaping hearts and minds, the industry had helped secure victory as surely as any army in the field. As Allied forces advanced into Germany, Hollywood's influence extended beyond morale and training into the shaping of historical memory. Filmmakers documented the liberation of towns, concentration camps, and war-torn cities, capturing both devastation and triumph. These images were not only educational for soldiers and civilians, but also served as enduring records of human endurance and moral responsibility. The films conveyed the cost of tyranny, the stakes of global conflict, and the human stories behind strategy and logistics, ensuring that the lessons of the war were preserved in vivid, emotionally resonant detail. Directors and cinematographers risked life alongside soldiers to create authentic depictions of combat and its aftermath. John Huston filmed soldiers in the ruins of Monte Cassino, capturing both the chaos of battle and the determination required to prevail. These images were immediately valuable for training, offering lessons in navigation, unit coordination, and battlefield psychology. Beyond their tactical utility, they allowed civilians at home to witness the realities of war firsthand, fostering empathy, understanding, and continued support for the war effort. Hollywood had transformed its cameras into instruments of both education and emotional engagement. Newsreels provided a constant stream of updates from the front, reaching millions of Americans weekly. Scenes of soldiers clearing villages, rebuilding infrastructure, and assisting civilians connected home audiences to the human side of military operations. Beyond reporting, newsreels created a shared national consciousness, showing that every action on the battlefield had consequences for families, communities, and nations. The immediacy of these visuals reinforced the necessity of continued sacrifice, sustaining engagement through a combination of information, emotion, and cinematic storytelling. Animation and instructional content continued to support the military in vital ways. Walt Disney Studios and others produced visual guides on battlefield medicine, map reading, and operational planning, translating complex techniques into accessible lessons. These films were widely distributed to training camps, providing recruits with clear, memorable instruction that enhanced their readiness and survivability. Hollywood's ability to merge creativity with technical precision turned storytelling into a practical tool for saving lives and improving operational effectiveness. Hollywood also influenced public perception of victory and responsibility. Films emphasized the contributions of ordinary Americans in factories, laboratories, and auxiliary units, illustrating that success depended on collective effort. Women and minority workers were shown as essential to production, logistics, and intelligence, challenging pre-war social norms and reinforcing unity. This portrayal fostered inclusion, bolstered morale, and ensured that the home front remained as organized, efficient, and committed as the soldiers in combat. Hollywood's narrative power was as crucial in shaping domestic society as it was on distant battlefields. Stars of the screen continued to serve as both symbols and active participants. Jimmy Stewart, serving as a bomber pilot, brought authenticity to wartime films, while Clark Gable documented aerial operations firsthand. Their involvement bridged Hollywood and the military, reinforcing credibility and emotional resonance. Civilians felt a personal connection to the conflict through these figures, motivating bond purchases, volunteerism, and continued engagement with the war effort. Hollywood's influence extended from theaters to factories, homes, and military bases, shaping perception, morale, and action across the nation. Hollywood studios had become industrial and cultural powerhouses. Sound stages were converted into classrooms and production facilities, prop shops produced essential equipment, and production schedules operated under wartime urgency. The city's infrastructure, creativity, and technical expertise were fully mobilized, functioning as a critical extension of national power. In a conflict defined by speed, coordination, and total societal engagement, Hollywood proved that culture could be weaponized, its narratives, images, and personnel contributing directly to victory. By late 1945, the cumulative impact of Hollywood was undeniable. The industry had informed, trained, and inspired millions, provided soldiers with practical instruction, and fostered a sense of shared purpose and understanding across the United States. Films, documentaries, and newsreels shaped both perception and behavior, creating a society fully mobilized for total war. Hollywood had transformed storytelling into a strategic instrument, proving that imagination, creativity, and cultural influence could play a decisive role in shaping the outcome of history, helping America and its allies secure victory in World War II. As victory approached in Europe, Hollywood's role shifted toward documenting the final chapters of the conflict while preparing the nation for the aftermath. Filmmakers followed troops into Germany, capturing the liberation of concentration camps and the ruins of cities left by relentless bombing. The stark imagery conveyed both horror and hope. Horror at the atrocities committed and the destruction wrought. Hope in the resilience of civilians and the courage of soldiers. These films served a dual purpose, educating the public while cementing the narrative of moral responsibility and collective effort that had been cultivated throughout the war. Combat filmmakers faced extraordinary dangers as they captured the front lines. John Huston and other directors embedded with advancing units navigated artillery fire, collapsing buildings, and unpredictable skirmishes to record authentic footage. Their work became more than documentation. It was a historical record, a training tool, and a morale booster. Soldiers used these films to study tactics, observe enemy behavior, and learn from the experiences of comrades in other theaters. Hollywood's cameras had become instruments not only of storytelling but of survival, bridging the gap between operational necessity and emotional resonance. Newsreels continued to bring immediate wartime updates into American theaters, often within days of events occurring. The public witnessed Allied forces crossing rivers, liberating towns, and encountering pockets of resistance. These images made the abstract reality of war tangible, reminding civilians of the human stakes behind their sacrifices on the home front. The weekly ritual of viewing frontline events reinforced a sense of collective purpose, ensuring that rationing, bond drives, and volunteerism remained meaningful acts of contribution rather than abstract duties. Hollywood was translating global conflict into personal responsibility. Instructional and training films remained a cornerstone of Hollywood's wartime output. Animated sequences and live-action demonstrations clarified complex operations such as demolition, navigation, and artillery coordination. Recruits absorbed lessons more effectively through visual storytelling, increasing readiness and survivability in combat. In this way, Hollywood's narrative expertise became a practical tool of war, turning cinematic innovation into a life-saving mechanism for troops facing unprecedented challenges. The home front was simultaneously shaped by Hollywood's narratives. Films emphasized the indispensable contributions of women, minorities, and industrial workers, reinforcing social cohesion and unity. Stories highlighted the ingenuity, dedication, and courage of individuals far from the battlefield, underscoring the principle that total war demanded participation from every segment of society. Civilians were inspired not just to comply with rationing and bond drives, but to view themselves as integral participants in the global struggle, their efforts directly tied to the success of soldiers overseas. Stars continued to act as cultural and motivational ambassadors. Jimmy Stewart, Clark Gable, and other actors serving in military film units reinforced authenticity in Hollywood productions while maintaining visibility as symbols of national service. Their participation connected audiences to the realities of war, bridging the emotional distance between home and front lines. Through these figures, Hollywood linked entertainment, credibility, and civic responsibility, creating a feedback loop that strengthened morale, inspired action, and maintained national focus on victory. Hollywood's industrial infrastructure was fully mobilized by 1945. Studios operated as training centers, production hubs, and logistical support facilities, producing both morale-boosting content and technical instructional films. Props, costumes, and set designs were repurposed for military use, illustrating how creativity and artistry could be transformed into practical wartime contributions. This integration of cultural production and operational support demonstrated that modern warfare relied not only on guns and machinery, but also on imagination, coordination, and communication on a massive scale. By the end of the European conflict, Hollywood's influence was clear and enduring. It had informed the public, trained soldiers, shaped perception, and reinforced national unity. Films, newsreels, and instructional content connected civilians and troops, turning imagination into strategy, narrative into preparation, and storytelling into action. Hollywood had become an essential instrument of total war, proving that culture, creativity, and communication could help secure victory alongside tanks, ships, and planes. The stage was set for the next challenge, translating these lessons into the final campaign against Japan and shaping the post-war world through the power of American storytelling. With the war in Europe concluding, Hollywood turned its gaze to the Pacific, where American forces faced a protracted and brutal campaign against Japan. Filmmakers embedded with troops in the Pacific Islands documented amphibious assaults, jungle warfare, and naval operations, providing both historical record and practical training material. The dense jungles, treacherous reefs, and entrenched enemy positions presented unique challenges, and Hollywood's expertise in visual storytelling was invaluable in conveying the strategies and risks involved. Soldiers relied on these films to anticipate terrain, understand enemy tactics, and mentally prepare for the intensity of combat. Newsreels brought the realities of the Pacific War into American theaters with unprecedented immediacy. Audiences watched Marines storming beaches, engaging in close-quarters combat, and overcoming natural obstacles under heavy fire. These images connected the home front to distant islands, reinforcing the need for continued support, production, and sacrifice. Civilians gained a visceral understanding of the challenges faced by their countrymen, transforming abstract statistics into human stories of courage, endurance, and tactical ingenuity. Hollywood had again bridged the gap between battlefield and home, shaping perception, morale, and engagement. Training and instructional films became increasingly specialized. Animations demonstrated intricate details of amphibious landings, jungle navigation, and shipboard procedures, while live-action sequences showed coordinated assaults, signaling, and equipment used under combat conditions. Recruits and officers alike relied on these materials to supplement field instruction, gaining knowledge that could determine survival. Hollywood's ability to translate complex operations into clear, visual narratives proved essential, turning cinematic expertise into a direct force multiplier for the military in one of the war's most challenging theaters. The portrayal of heroism expanded to reflect the diverse composition of American forces. Films emphasized the contributions of Navy Seabees, Marine Corps units, and Army engineers, showcasing teamwork, technical skill, and ingenuity under fire. Women serving in auxiliary roles and workers in wartime industries were highlighted as essential to success, reinforcing the principle that every effort, on the battlefield or at home, was integral to victory. Hollywood's narratives shaped a collective understanding that the war required a total national effort, blending frontline heroics with civilian resilience. Stars continued to act as emissaries and symbols of national commitment. Figures like Clark Gable, who documented aerial campaigns, and other actors involved in military units connected audiences to the war through both authenticity and familiarity. Their presence elevated the emotional resonance of films and newsreels, reminding Americans that the sacrifices and risks faced by soldiers were mirrored by the cultural and civic engagement of the nation. Hollywood leveraged celebrity not merely for entertainment, but as a conduit of credibility, motivation, and unity. The industrial might of Hollywood remained fully mobilized. Sound stages and production teams produced morale-boosting content, training films, and technical guides, often under accelerated wartime schedules. Props, costumes, and sets were adapted for instructional use, demonstrating the flexibility and ingenuity of an industry capable of rapid, large-scale mobilization. Hollywood's infrastructure and creativity functioned as a strategic asset, supporting military preparation, sustaining morale, and ensuring that culture itself was a tool of national power. Beyond direct military applications, Hollywood shaped the post-war imagination. Films depicted the human cost of conflict, the resilience of soldiers and civilians, and the moral imperatives underlying Allied victories. These narratives prepared audiences to confront the challenges of peace, reconstruction, and the emerging geopolitical order. By documenting both heroism and hardship, Hollywood ensured that the cultural memory of the war would be informed by authenticity, empathy, and moral reflection. By the close of 1945, Hollywood's impact on the Pacific Campaign was undeniable. It had trained soldiers, informed civilians, and maintained morale through both entertainment and education. The industry's work bridged vast distances, turned imagination into operational effectiveness, and transformed narrative into strategy. Hollywood had proven that cultural production could be as vital to victory as any weapon, providing the nation with the knowledge, inspiration, and emotional resilience necessary to prevail in the world's most expansive and devastating conflict. As the final months of the war in the Pacific approached, Hollywood's role expanded to both record and interpret the closing chapters of global conflict. Filmmakers embedded with American forces documented amphibious assaults, urban fighting, and the logistical triumphs necessary to sustain a prolonged campaign. The films captured the extraordinary resilience of soldiers confronting heat, disease, and entrenched enemy positions, providing a visceral education for audiences and a historical archive for future generations. These visual narratives emphasized not only strategy and tactics, but the human cost of victory, blending instruction with profound emotional resonance. Cinematographers faced unique challenges in the Pacific theater. Dense jungles, unpredictable weather, and relentless combat conditions made filming perilous. Yet directors like John Huston and combat cameramen pressed forward to record authentic experiences. The footage served dual purposes. It informed and trained soldiers, and it provided civilians with a clear sense of the bravery, innovation, and endurance required for success. Hollywood's commitment to authenticity turned the act of filmmaking into a high-risk form of participation in the war, ensuring that audiences witnessed both heroism and hardship with unflinching clarity. Newsreels became the primary medium through which the American public experienced the Pacific War in near real time. Audiences saw Marines landing under fire, engineers clearing mines, and medics tending to the wounded, creating an intimate connection between home and front. This immediacy transformed public perception of the war, fostering empathy and sustaining civic engagement through rationing, war bond purchases, and volunteerism. Hollywood's visual storytelling ensured that Americans recognized the tangible contributions of soldiers, maintaining national commitment to the war effort during its grueling final stages. Training and instructional films played a critical role in preparing troops for complex operations. Animated sequences and live-action demonstrations illustrated amphibious landings, coordinated assaults, and specialized tasks such as demolition and signaling. Soldiers who absorbed these visual lessons were better prepared for the realities of combat, with improved situational awareness, coordination, and survivability. Hollywood's ability to translate intricate military procedures into clear, memorable visual narratives exemplified how creativity and technical skill could directly enhance operational effectiveness. The depiction of ordinary Americans remained central to Hollywood's messaging. Factories, laboratories, and auxiliary services were showcased as vital components of victory, highlighting the essential work of women, minorities, and immigrant communities. By emphasizing the collective nature of the war effort, Hollywood reinforced social cohesion and national purpose. Civilians were portrayed not as passive observers, but as active participants whose labor and ingenuity were integral to battlefield success, creating a sense of shared responsibility that extended from home front to combat zone. Stars continued to embody both cultural authority and national service. Figures such as Jimmy Stewart and Clark Gable contributed to combat documentation and training films, lending credibility and emotional weight to Hollywood's wartime output. Their visible involvement created a symbolic bridge between celebrity and civic duty, inspiring audiences to engage with the war effort and reinforcing the moral imperative of national participation. Hollywood leveraged these cultural icons to enhance the psychological and emotional resonance of its films, solidifying the connection between entertainment, education, and patriotic duty. Hollywood studios had become industrial and logistical powerhouses, fully integrated into the wartime apparatus. Production teams operated under accelerated schedules, sound stages doubled as classrooms, and props and costumes were repurposed for practical instruction. This infrastructure allowed Hollywood to produce both instructional content and morale-boosting narratives simultaneously, demonstrating the adaptability and strategic value of its creative resources. In a total war requiring coordination across every sector, Hollywood proved that culture and industrial capacity could function as strategic tools of national power. By the end of the war in the Pacific, Hollywood's multifaceted contributions were unmistakable. Films, newsreels, and instructional materials had informed civilians, trained soldiers, and sustained morale across a nation fully mobilized for conflict. The industry had documented heroism, hardship, and moral triumph, ensuring that the story of the war would be remembered with both accuracy and emotional resonance. Hollywood had proven that narrative, creativity, and cultural influence were not ancillary to warfare. They were essential instruments of victory, shaping hearts, minds, and actions on a scale unmatched by any other non-military institution. As 1945 unfolded, Hollywood's influence reached its zenith, shaping the final stages of the war while laying the foundation for the post-war world. Filmmakers and studios had become indispensable to the military, producing content that educated, inspired, and preserved history. Documentaries captured the fall of Berlin, the surrender of Japanese forces, and the liberation of occupied territories, creating a visual archive that chronicled both triumph and tragedy. These films provided Americans with the first true understanding of the scale, complexity, and human cost of the conflict, ensuring that the narrative of victory was informed by both fact and emotion. On the battlefield, cinematographers continued to immense immense danger to capture authentic footage. Directors like John Huston and William Wyler embedded with soldiers in critical operations, filming in bombed-out cities and contested zones. Their work preserved the realities of combat, from the logistics of urban warfare to the psychological strain on troops. These films were invaluable for training, historical documentation, and public understanding, demonstrating how Hollywood's storytelling capacity had been transformed into a tool of strategic significance. The cameras were no longer mere instruments of art, they were instruments of war. newsreels remained a primary conduit connecting the home front to the final offensives. Audiences watched soldiers clearing mines, securing strategic positions, and engaging in intense combat, creating a shared experience of the war's climactic moments. Civilians witnessed the bravery, ingenuity, and suffering of those in combat, reinforcing their own roles in supporting the effort through rationing, bond drives, and volunteerism. Hollywood's ability to translate distant, complex events into accessible, emotionally resonant narratives ensured that the public remained informed and invested in the outcomes of battles unfolding thousands of miles away. Training films continued to save lives and increase effectiveness. Animated sequences, technical demonstrations, and dramatized simulations illustrated everything from advanced gunnery and amphibious tactics to engineering operations and first aid. These materials allowed soldiers to visualize scenarios, anticipate challenges, and internalize procedures in ways that traditional classroom instruction could not match. Hollywood had become a force multiplier, turning expertise in narrative and imagery into tangible benefits for military readiness and operational success. The home front's cultural engagement remained equally vital. Films highlighted the contributions of women, African Americans, and immigrant workers in both industry and auxiliary services, reinforcing the idea that every citizen's effort mattered. Hollywood emphasized collective action, depicting factories, laboratories, and supply chains as critical extensions of the battlefield. Civilians were encouraged to see themselves as active participants, their labor and dedication forming an essential link in the chain of victory. This messaging strengthened national cohesion, ensuring that the war's final stages were met with unwavering domestic support. Stars continued to bridge the gap between Hollywood and military service. Jimmy Stewart, Clark Gable, and others contributed to both filming and morale, their personal involvement enhancing the authenticity and emotional impact of the films. Their celebrity created a symbolic link between popular culture and civic duty, motivating audiences to participate in the war effort through enlistment, volunteering, and financial support. Hollywood leveraged its cultural capital to reinforce unity, morale, and national purpose at a moment when sustained effort was crucial. The technical and industrial capacities of Hollywood were fully mobilized by this stage. Studios operated as production hubs for newsreels, training films, morale-boosting content, and post-war documentation. Props, costumes, and sets were repurposed for practical wartime applications, while creative teams worked under accelerated schedules to meet the extraordinary demands of a global conflict. Hollywood's physical and intellectual infrastructure had become a strategic resource, demonstrating that creativity, organization, and storytelling could serve as instruments of national power alongside conventional military assets. By mid-1945, as Allied forces prepared to bring the war to a close in the Pacific, Hollywood's contributions were clear and multifaceted. It had trained troops, informed civilians, boosted morale, and preserved history in a vivid and lasting form. Films, newsreels, and instructional materials created an informed, emotionally engaged society and enhanced the operational effectiveness of the military. In doing so, Hollywood had transformed itself into a strategic asset of unparalleled significance, proving that culture, creativity, and communication could influence outcomes as decisively as tanks, planes, and ships in the pursuit of victory. In the immediate aftermath of the Pacific War, Hollywood's role evolved from documenting active combat to interpreting its consequences and shaping collective memory. Filmmakers turned their cameras on the devastated cities, liberated POWs, and civilians who had endured years of occupation. These films emphasized both the triumph of Allied forces and the profound human cost of global conflict, offering audiences an opportunity to confront the realities of war beyond the headlines. Hollywood's documentation created a bridge between military strategy and human experience, ensuring that the lessons of courage, resilience, and moral responsibility would endure. Embedded cinematographers and directors continued to work under challenging conditions even after hostilities ceased. John Huston and others filmed Japanese cities in ruins, the aftermath of firebombing campaigns, and the initial stages of occupation and reconstruction. Their footage served multiple purposes: training and educational resources for occupying forces, historical documentation, and material for public understanding. Through these films, civilians could witness the scale of devastation and the challenges of post-war stabilization, fostering empathy and a deeper appreciation for the sacrifices made on every front. Newsreels captured pivotal moments, such as the formal surrender ceremonies and the repatriation of soldiers and prisoners. Audiences across America watched these events in near real time, experiencing the closure of a long and costly struggle. By presenting these moments visually, Hollywood transformed abstract political and military developments into tangible, emotionally resonant experiences. The immediacy of film allowed civilians to feel connected to the war's conclusion, reinforcing the emotional and cultural significance of victory. Instructional and educational content shifted to peacetime applications. Animated sequences and documentaries helped troops understand occupation protocols, demobilization processes, and the transition from wartime operations to civil governance. Soldiers and officers used these materials to navigate the complexities of Reconstruction, emphasizing both strategic considerations and the human dimension of administering liberated regions. Hollywood's expertise in clear, visual storytelling ensured that critical information could be absorbed quickly and effectively, illustrating the versatility of narrative as a tool of practical guidance. The portrayal of the home front evolved to reflect the transition from wartime urgency to post-war reconstruction. Films highlighted the ongoing contributions of women, industrial workers, and minority communities in rebuilding the nation and supporting returning veterans. By depicting civilians as active agents in the nation's recovery, Hollywood reinforced the notion that victory was not an endpoint but a continuum, requiring sustained effort, ingenuity, and civic responsibility. This messaging helped shape societal expectations and fostered unity during the challenging transition to peace. Stars of Hollywood continued to play symbolic and practical roles in shaping public understanding. Figures who had served in military film units, like Jimmy Stewart and Clark Gable, lent authenticity to narratives while participating in efforts to document and interpret the war's aftermath. Their presence provided continuity between wartime service and peacetime reflection, creating a cultural touchstone for audiences seeking to reconcile personal loss with national achievement. Hollywood leveraged these figures to maintain engagement, inspire civic responsibility, and preserve the moral and emotional lessons of the conflict. Hollywood studios remained hubs of industrial and creative output, repurposed to address the demands of post-war society. Production facilities created instructional materials, morale-boosting content for returning troops, and documentaries highlighting Reconstruction efforts. Creative teams worked to translate the experiences of soldiers and civilians into compelling visual narratives, ensuring that history was recorded with both accuracy and emotional depth. This combination of industrial capacity and narrative expertise allowed Hollywood to shape understanding, preserve memory, and contribute to the nation's transition from war to peace. By the close of 1945, Hollywood's influence had left an indelible mark on both the conduct and perception of World War II. The industry had informed, trained, and inspired millions, providing soldiers with critical knowledge and civilians with emotional and moral guidance. Films, newsreels, and documentaries documented heroism, sacrifice, and resilience while reinforcing a collective understanding of victory and responsibility. Hollywood had demonstrated that storytelling and cultural production were not mere embellishments. They were essential instruments of national strategy, shaping the outcome of the war and the collective memory of those who lived through it. As the dust settled from global conflict, Hollywood turned its focus toward the broader lessons of World War II, seeking to capture not only the military triumphs, but the moral and human dimensions of the struggle. Documentaries explored the resilience of civilians under occupation, the bravery of resistance movements, and the complex ethical dilemmas faced by soldiers. These films provided Americans with a nuanced understanding of victory, emphasizing that the war had been fought not merely with weapons, but with courage, ingenuity, and an unwavering commitment to justice. Hollywood had become a chronicler of humanity as much as of strategy. Filmmakers continued to embed with returning troops, documenting the challenges of demobilization and reintegration into civilian life. Scenes of soldiers reuniting with families, adjusting to peacetime routines, and coping with trauma offered audiences insight into the psychological costs of war. These narratives humanized the veterans, providing the public with a deeper appreciation for their sacrifices. By combining intimate storytelling with factual accuracy, Hollywood ensured that the nation's understanding of the war extended beyond battle statistics to the lived experience of those who fought it. Newsreels during this period shifted from frontline updates to reflective retrospectives. Audiences saw soldiers participating in victory parades, the raising of flags over liberated cities, and the first moments of Reconstruction. These images reinforced a sense of collective achievement and closure, connecting individual acts of courage to broader historical outcomes. Hollywood's capacity to translate distant events into compelling visual narratives allowed civilians to experience the culmination of the war as if they had been present, fostering a shared cultural memory of both triumph and sacrifice. Instructional films adapted to peacetime objectives, focusing on rebuilding, occupational governance, and humanitarian relief. Animated sequences and live-action demonstrations guided soldiers and officers in administering liberated territories, managing resources, and assisting displaced populations. Hollywood's visual storytelling techniques made complex logistical and ethical challenges accessible, ensuring that returning personnel could contribute effectively to stabilizing post-war regions. This versatility illustrated the enduring practical value of cinematic expertise in both wartime and Reconstruction contexts. Hollywood also highlighted the ongoing contributions of women, minority workers, and immigrant communities in shaping the post-war order. Films depicted their involvement in factories, laboratories, and civic projects, reinforcing the notion that the nation's success depended on inclusive participation. By emphasizing collective effort and resilience, Hollywood fostered social cohesion and strengthened the sense of shared responsibility, helping Americans navigate the transition from war to peace while preserving the lessons of unity and purpose cultivated during the conflict. Stars continued to serve as cultural emissaries, bridging the gap between wartime heroism and peacetime reflection. Figures like Jimmy Stewart and Clark Gable, who had served in military film units, participated in documentaries and morale projects that highlighted both the human cost of war and the opportunities for national renewal. Their visibility reinforced the continuity between sacrifice, achievement, and civic responsibility, reminding audiences that the values forged during wartime were essential for rebuilding a stable and prosperous post-war society. The industrial and creative infrastructure of Hollywood remained a critical asset during Reconstruction. Studios produced educational films, documentaries, and morale content for returning veterans and civilian populations alike. Production teams adapted to new priorities, creating narratives that documented rebuilding efforts, preserved historical memory, and offered guidance for reintegration. This capacity to combine artistry with practical purpose demonstrated Hollywood's unique ability to influence both understanding and action, bridging cultural production with national strategy. By the end of this transitional period, Hollywood's wartime contributions had cemented the industry as a strategic force in American society. It had informed, trained, and inspired millions, documented both heroism and suffering, and shaped collective memory with authenticity and emotional resonance. Through films, newsreels, and instructional content, Hollywood had proven that storytelling and cultural production were essential instruments of national power, capable of influencing perceptions, behavior, and historical understanding on a scale unmatched by any other civilian institution. As the post-war world began to take shape, Hollywood's influence shifted from immediate wartime support to shaping the narrative of history itself. Filmmakers chronicled the stories of liberation, survival, and Reconstruction, ensuring that the complex realities of World War II were preserved for posterity. From the ruins of European cities to the islands of the Pacific, films captured both the devastation wrought by conflict and the resilience of the human spirit. These narratives emphasized the moral stakes of the war, highlighting courage, sacrifice, and the triumph of collective effort over tyranny, creating a lasting cultural record that would educate generations. Direct engagement with veterans and civilians enriched the authenticity of Hollywood's post-war output. Directors interviewed soldiers returning from front lines, documenting their personal experiences, fears, and triumphs. These intimate portrayals offered audiences insight into the psychological and emotional dimensions of war, revealing the long-lasting effects of combat and occupation. By presenting these personal stories alongside broader historical events, Hollywood ensured that the nation's memory of the war was grounded in lived experience, not just statistics or military strategy. Newsreels evolved into reflective retrospectives, presenting both the victories and the costs of the conflict. American audiences witnessed the raising of flags over liberated cities, the return of prisoners of war, and the reconstruction of devastated communities. These visuals provided a shared national experience, reinforcing the moral and emotional significance of victory while fostering a sense of closure. Hollywood's ability to translate complex global events into relatable, visually compelling narratives ensured that civilians could connect with the war's outcomes on a deeply personal level. Instructional and educational films continued to serve practical purposes in the post-war context. Animated sequences and live-action demonstrations guided soldiers and civilian administrators in rebuilding infrastructure, managing displaced populations, and restoring civil order. Hollywood's mastery of visual storytelling made these lessons accessible and memorable, illustrating that the industry's technical expertise extended beyond entertainment into tangible contributions to national and international recovery efforts. Hollywood's narratives increasingly highlighted the contributions of women, minority communities, and immigrant populations, framing their work as essential to both wartime success and post-war recovery. Films depicted factory work, scientific research, and civil service as heroic and indispensable, fostering social cohesion and reinforcing a shared sense of purpose. By portraying ordinary citizens as central to national achievement, Hollywood cultivated a broader understanding of heroism and responsibility, expanding the cultural perception of who contributed to victory. Stars of Hollywood remained vital figures in post-war storytelling. Figures like Jimmy Stewart and Clark Gable, who had served in military film units, participated in documentaries and educational projects that humanized the war and guided audiences through its aftermath. Their involvement lent credibility and emotional resonance to Hollywood's narratives, linking the experiences of soldiers and civilians to the familiar faces of the silver screen. Through this continuity, Hollywood reinforced lessons of sacrifice, duty, and civic responsibility while ensuring engagement with both memory and history. The industrial and creative capacities of Hollywood were fully leveraged to serve the needs of a nation transitioning from war to peace. Studios produced documentaries, instructional films, and morale-boosting content for both soldiers and civilians, preserving the historical record and guiding reconstruction. Production teams adapted rapidly to post-war priorities, demonstrating that Hollywood's combination of creativity, technical skill, and organizational power could shape society and policy as effectively as any government agency or military operation. By the end of this period, Hollywood had firmly established itself as more than an entertainment industry. It had documented history, trained soldiers, educated civilians, preserved memory, and shaped collective perception on a national scale. Its films, newsreels, and educational content had transformed storytelling into a strategic instrument, influencing both immediate wartime outcomes and the long-term cultural understanding of World War II. Hollywood had proven that creativity, narrative mastery, and cultural production were indispensable tools in shaping society, memory, and the trajectory of history itself. As America transitioned from war to peace, Hollywood's legacy became inseparable from the story of World War II. The industry had evolved into a force capable of shaping national consciousness, bridging the gap between the front lines and the home front, and preserving the collective memory of a generation. Documentaries, newsreels, and feature films captured both triumph and tragedy, ensuring that the sacrifices of soldiers and civilians were immortalized. Hollywood's work transformed abstract notions of victory and strategy into tangible, emotionally resonant experiences that audiences could understand, feel, and remember. Filmmakers documented the return of soldiers, the rebuilding of cities, and the challenges of demobilization, providing an unvarnished look at the human costs of war. Scenes of veterans adjusting to civilian life, dealing with loss, or reconnecting with family conveyed the psychological and emotional aftermath of conflict. Hollywood's attention to detail in these portrayals humanized the veterans, offering audiences insight into the enduring impact of the war on those who had fought. By weaving these personal narratives into the larger historical framework, Hollywood ensured that the nation's understanding of World War II was both comprehensive and empathetic. Newsreels captured iconic moments of closure, from formal surrender ceremonies to the reconstruction of liberated cities. Audiences across the United States were able to witness these events in near real time, forging a collective sense of accomplishment and shared history. The immediacy of these visual records allowed civilians to grasp the enormity of the war's conclusion, bridging thousands of miles and thousands of experiences into a single, cohesive understanding. Hollywood had transformed information into shared cultural memory, creating a visual narrative that united the nation in reflection and recognition. Instructional and educational films played a vital role in transitioning from wartime operations to peacetime responsibilities. Animated sequences and live-action demonstrations guided soldiers, officers, and civilian administrators through tasks such as rebuilding infrastructure, managing displaced populations, and restoring civil order. Hollywood's mastery of visual storytelling made complex concepts accessible, ensuring that the knowledge gained during the war could be applied effectively in reconstruction and governance. The industry demonstrated that its expertise extended beyond entertainment, influencing practical outcomes and shaping the post-war world. Hollywood's portrayal of ordinary citizens emphasized the continuity between wartime contribution and post-war responsibility. Films highlighted women, minority groups, and immigrant workers, celebrating their critical roles in production, scientific research, and civic engagement. These narratives reinforced the notion that the nation's success was a collective achievement, emphasizing cooperation, ingenuity, and resilience. By extending recognition beyond the battlefield, Hollywood shaped cultural understanding of heroism, highlighting the interdependence of soldiers and civilians in achieving national goals. Stars of Hollywood continued to serve as cultural and moral touchstones. Figures like Jimmy Stewart and Clark Gable, who had served in military film units, participated in documentaries and retrospectives, lending authenticity and gravitas to wartime narratives. Their visibility bridged the gap between the personal and the historical, reminding audiences of the human faces behind the conflict. Through their involvement, Hollywood reinforced the lessons of duty, sacrifice, and civic responsibility, ensuring that the cultural memory of the war was both emotionally resonant and morally instructive. The industrial and creative capacity of Hollywood remained a cornerstone of post-war reconstruction and historical preservation. Studios produced content that documented victory, chronicled the challenges of rebuilding, and educated both returning veterans and civilians. Production teams applied the skills honed during wartime, rapid coordination, technical innovation, and storytelling precision, to the task of preserving history and guiding national understanding. Hollywood had proven that culture, creativity, and industry could function as strategic instruments, shaping perception, behavior, and memory on a national scale. By the conclusion of this transformative era, Hollywood had firmly established itself as a vital component of American power, both during and after World War II. It had trained soldiers, informed civilians, preserved history, and shaped the moral and emotional understanding of an entire generation. Films, documentaries, and newsreels had become more than entertainment. They were instruments of national strategy, cultural education, and historical preservation. Hollywood had demonstrated that storytelling, creativity, and cultural production were indispensable to the nation's victory, legacy, and enduring understanding of the war, leaving a mark on history as profound as any battlefield achievement.